So I'm over here in ThinkOrSwim, and what I'm going to go through is a software bug that I ran into regarding if statements and something called compound value. So if you're watching this, I'm assuming you're familiar with ThinkOrSwim, but just to give some baseline, ThinkOrSwim is a brokerage software currently owned by Charles Schwab, and then ThinkScript is a coding language inside of the software. So I'm coding last night, and I reached this point where the code's working on a lot of different tickers, but I get to another ticker and it suddenly stops working. And so I dig in and say, what's wrong here? And as I'm doing it, I'm starting to remember when I was coding a lot more intensely many years ago that I was running into this issue in the past. It's not super frequent. I would say 20 to 30% of the time. But it is something that I've run into when I do big codes, especially trying to calculate strategies in here, running into. And so dug in a little deeper, came back tonight and saw that the error isn't in there, doesn't exist. So I'm going to go through sort of start to finish. First, I'm going to walk through setting up a code that I was doing last night, real basic. It's going to illuminate how the if statements and compound value should work. Then I'm going to show how it was behaving last night, and then some solutions, what we can do to prevent that so that those 20 to 30% of the time it will avoid having an issue. So we'll start out by getting the code set up so we can come up to studies, and we will come to the studies and strategy sections. We can click create new study. I've already got one set up here. And so what I'm going to do is I am going to first start with defining a red candle. We want a value of 1 on every candle that's red, and if it's not red, then a value of 0. So we'll say whenever the close is less than the open. And what we can do to check and make sure that these values are correct, we'll do add chart bubble. We'll put 1 as the first parameter, close as the second parameter. We'll put red candle. What we want to see is the third parameter, and then for the fourth parameter, which is the color, we'll say if red candle, which means if red candle equals 1, then show us color.yellow, else color.white. We can click apply, and we can see there right off the left side here, 1 for those red candles and then 0 for the green candles. And so what we want to do next is we want to have a 1 value for every candle that is directly after a red candle. So if we look at candles 2 and 3 here, what we would want for this next one is we want to have it return true for candles 3 and candles 4. And so how we'll do that is we'll say define candle after red candle. We'll say red candle, and then we'll say a 1 indexer. So what this indicates is it's telling it to go back 1 candle and look at the value of red candle 1 candle back. So on the second candle here where it's red, it is going to go back and look and see if red candle equals 1. We can actually say here equals 1 just to make it a little more verbose. So if that prior candle is a red candle, it'll return true. So we should see candles 3 and candle 4 as a valid one there. All right, so I'll go ahead and charted that with a pink coloring. You can see we have candle 3 and candle 4 as a pink 1, and then candle 5 is 0, which is correct, and then candle 6 there is a pink 1. We can see here on the left side that it is saying that there is a red candle right before this first candle. Is that the case? We don't know. We can't see it, and if I had to guess, I would say that the candle right before the first candle is a red candle, and that's why it's returning 1. It may look back and find that. But this concept is going to be important later, because this is why we use compound value, because we shouldn't have a value here on the first candle. And so that's the point of using compound value. Compound value will do is we'll be able to define a value for the first candle that's different than the rules that'll be applied for candle 2 and going forward. So we'll dig into that a little later. So the next part here will say entry candle. Where do we want the entry to be? Well, I want it to be right after that red candle. So I want it to be a candle after a red candle. However, candle after red candle is going to be every single candle that's after a red candle. We only want it to be one where it's right after, and then, like for example, the second and third candle here. Let's say the fourth and the fifth candle were all red. Well, we're going to get an entry candle on the second red candle, the third red candle, the fourth red candle. We don't want it to be on all of those. We just want it to be on the second candle there. So what we'll say is, for the second candle here, we're saying we want a red one there, but then we're going to look back one candle as well. We're going to say in that prior candle, we want it to be 0. So we'll say candle after red candle. We'll use the 1 indexer, and we'll say that equals 0. All right, and so we've successfully added our entry candle. Now let's ignore candle 1 for the time being. For candle 3, you can see that it's returning true there. Candle 6, it's returning a green 1 there, and then everything else is returning 0. So that's working good. Now the final piece of this, what we want is, for when we have an entry candle, we want to obtain the opening value of that candle, and then we want to drag that forward until we get to a new opening, and then we'll replace the opening value with the opening of that different candle. So we're essentially dragging this opening price forward. What we'll do here is we'll say entry open, and we'll do just a basic if statement to start. So if entry candle, then open, otherwise get the prior candle value of entry open, so whatever that is. So we can say entry open, and then 1 indexer there. All right, so I've added that here, those values on the 4th line here, and let's ignore the first 2 for now. You can see here the third candle 612.18, and we can see that that is the opening of that third candle. And then on the 4th candle here, you can see it's the same value from the third candle, 612.18, the 5th candle 612.18, and that's what we want. When it's a 0, when it's not an entry candle, we want it to go back and get that very last opening value from the very last entry candle. And then when we have a new entry candle, it changes, 612.24, and we can see that matches the opening up there. You can see though here on the first candle that it's pulling a value, 610.5, which is the opening. And so, we don't have a candle showing, and we don't want to see a candle here, because I assume that it's basing it off of a red candle that was previous to this, but I can't see it. And that's what compound value exists for. Pulled up the ThinkOrSwim documentation here, and we'll sort of run through exactly what this does. The description calculates according to the following rule. If the bar number is greater than length is the very first parameter, then use visible data. Visible data is the second parameter. If it's not greater than that number, use historical data, which is the third parameter. So it's basically an if statement, and it's an if statement based on, we're defining a point based on the bar number. So for the default value here of 1, that means that if for the first candle, we're going to be using parameter 3. For the second candle and going forward, it would be the second parameter. And so we can change what is being calculated based on which bar number. So we can switch up the calculation in the middle of the graph if we wanted to, but here the most common use is just to be able to do something different on that very first candle. And the second sentence here, it says this function is used to initialize studies with recursion. And that's exactly what we're doing here. Initialize study meaning the very first time it begins to calculate, which would be the first bar, and then recursion is that process of looking backwards. So on this opening value, we're looking backwards and trying to get that number. What it's saying here is when we initialize it on this first candle and we try to go backwards, there's nothing to go backwards on. And so this compound value exists so that we can avoid any issues there. Now, it doesn't have an issue. It apparently It pulls the data that may exist previous to this that we can't see. But in theory, it should have an issue. So where do we do the compound value? Well, we could do it on entry open, we could do it on entry candle, or we can do it on both. I think it's best to do it on both because if we ever use entry candle, like let's say we counted how many entries we have, we wouldn't want to have it count the very first candle. And then for entry open, we want to be able to tell it what its value should be because it's going to see 0 on that. Once we change the entry candle to compound value, it's going to show 0 on that first candle. And then down here for entry open, it's going to say, okay, well, it's 0, so we should use this recursive value. And again, there's no candle before that. So it's probably best to use compound value on both. And when it's working correctly, it'll be a good thing. So what we'll do here, instead of doing this, I'll just leave this right here, and I'll add a 1 here to entry candle. And then, what happened here? Candle. And then we'll come down here and I'll define entry candle equals compound value. We'll say 1 for the first parameter. We'll say if entry candle 1. So that will be this up here. It's testing this. Now this second parameter is going to be for candles 2 and going forward. So we want it to be if entry candle, then 1, else 0. And then for this third parameter, we're telling it what do we want the first candle to be. We want it to be 0. So we'll define 0 there. We can hit apply, and you can see that updates that third chart bubble row there. Now we have 0 as the very first candle there. It also changed the entry open. It's now a 0, so by default it's showing 0. But as we'll show here in a minute, we have issues with compound values. Sometimes it works the way it's supposed to, sometimes it doesn't. So probably a good idea down here to do compound value as well, just to tell it exactly what we want that first candle to be. So we've said for the first candle here, for candles 2 and forward, we'll say if entry candle, then open, else look back and grab the prior entry open, just be entry open there. And then for the very first candle, we'll say we just want 0 there. And it didn't update anything because it automatically defaulted to 0, but you can see that it's since we told it to 0, it is 0 there. All right, so that's an overview of putting the code together. It's also an overview of how if statements and the compound value is supposed to work in here. So now we'll get to the issue I ran into yesterday. So you can see over here, pretty much the same exact code, a little bit of difference here, but nothing in here that's affecting anything. You can see up here, the very first candle, we have just a black bubble. And so what this is saying is that it's not a number. Where we just went through the code, it sort of looked back and I assume looked at whatever the prior candle was that we're not able to see and based it off of that. Here, this actually seems like how it probably should work in theory. If the candles doesn't exist, and it's trying to go back and look at a candle in the past, it probably should return a black bubble. And so what I did here, you can see entry candle, and we were defining the entry candle using that recursive value. And we know that it was returning not a number because a little later on I adjusted the code here to where I did an if statement that said if the entry candle is not a number, then return 0, else just do whatever the entry candle formula is. And it replaced that black bubble with a 0. So that was 100% what it was evaluating at. Instead of taking a guess, it was saying it's not a number. But here's where things get weird. So you can see entry open, I've done compound value. Let's move back here. So we've got the same setup here. I've changed the third parameter to 65 just to highlight, what exactly is being evaluated where. But other than that, it's the same exact thing. If entry candle, for candles 2 and going forward, if entry candle then give us the open value, otherwise look backwards. But for that very first candle, we wanted it to be 65. We look up here, so where the entry candle is going to be the second row bubble from the bottom. So that second from the bottom, when we see a green 1, that means it's an entry candle, and that we should be seeing the open on the third row from the bottom. So we're only looking at the middle bubbles here, the second and the third. Whenever that one is a green 1, the one that's third from the bottom is going to have the opening value. If it's 0, then it's going to look back and grab the value that was on the third row of bubbles in 1 bar backwards. And then 65, that should only be present on the first candle. But you can see here that it's doing all sorts of weird things. The very first candle, it's showing 0, and then for the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh, it's showing this third parameter. It completely doesn't make any sense because it's evaluating this third parameter all the way up to candle 7 when the first parameter here is 1. So I played with the code to try to figure out how I could fix it. And you can see here I removed compound value first. And so now we have just a basic if statement here at entry open. We say if the entry candle is 1, so that's the second row of bubbles from the bottom, then the third row should be the opening value of that candle. Otherwise, look back and grab the value 1 candle back. You can see here the second one, it is just ignoring it. So entry candle is 1 there, but it's not showing the open, it's just showing 0. And it does that all the way to the 7th one. So, and then for the 8th, that's the next entry candle, and it actually begins abiding by the rules. So then I said, okay, well, let's get rid of this recursive value here on the else and see if that fixes the problem. And sure enough, it does fix the problem. When we remove the recursive on that else statement, now it's evaluating, it's saying if the second row is a green 1, then return the open, which you see here in bar 2 and bar 8. If it's not that, then return 500, and it's doing it. And then go back and add that entry open recursive value there, and right back to not working, where we have zeros going all the way across for the first 7. So how do we fix the issue? The easiest thing to do is to just chop off the first 10 or 20 candles on a chart. The issue seems to be isolated to the very beginnings of the charts. Now, there's no specific number. Sometimes it's just the first candle, sometimes it's the 7th candle, sometimes it's the 10th candle. But generally 10 to 20 candles, if we chop off, I think that'll be a safe number. So the first thought I had was, okay, we'll come in here to the first parameter of compound value, and instead of 1, change this to 10 or 20 or whatever it is. Maybe set up a variable and just have the first parameter be a variable. The issue there is that when I tried that, I ran into other unexpected behavior. For instance, I had said skip the first 10 candles and did that for all compound values, and then it was skipping the first 20 candles. So I didn't understand why it was doing that. The easiest thing to do is to just look upstream in your code and figure out where the indicator line is and have it just skip those candles. And so what do I mean by that? I mean, if you look over here on the chart, we have 2 things. We have the indicator and then we have the value. So the green line is the indicator, and then the yellow line is the value that we're going to be using in the calculations. And so what we can say is, let's just turn off the indicator for the first 10, 20 lines. We don't need to mess with compound value. All we need to do is come up to the line where we set up the indicator. So that would be right here, entry candle 1. And what we'll do is we'll add to it. We'll say, we'll take this, these 2 parameters here, and we'll encompass them in brackets. And then we'll add on, and we'll say bar number. This is a built-in line call here. It'll return the number of the bar. So the first bar will be 1, the second bar will be 2, etc. And then we'll say greater than a specific line number. And so just to make this easy here, you can see on the left of the code here where we have the chart, you can see the indicator is returning true on the 3rd candle and the 6th candle. So let's go ahead and have it be on the 4th candle. And so what this will do is this will make anything that is we can say equals to. So the 3rd candle, the 2nd candle, the 1st candle will all be 0 by default because it doesn't meet this bar number. And then starting at the 4th candle, it will begin to evaluate whether we have an entry or not. So what we should see here is the 1 entry on the 3rd candle will go away, but the 6th candle will stay. We can hit apply. You can see that's what happens there. So that essentially invalidates these first 3 candles. So we can do this if we see it on the first 10 or 20. You know, to be safe, we can say 10 there. That will ignore the first 10 candles. You can come over here and see now the first 10 are all zeros, and then 9, 10. Then on the 10th candle, it begins to evaluate. And so on that 10th candle, it just happens to be right after a red candle and begins.